Thank you.
This is Hello Iowa City. This is our first of a 5 series where we're going to be looking at how we can communicate what we're doing here in Iowa City and maybe sharing with the world. In today's episode, we are very fortunate of having Pramila Dougal, with your new book that you're going to be talking about today, Shadows of Wealth. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. And my two co-hosts, please introduce yourselves.
Let me introduce Dr. Hani Al-Qadi, a legendary, well-known figure in Iowa City who hosts his own show, Education Exchange, and has a long history of doing many fantastic things in this town.
Thank you. And that's Dr. Viraj Sacker. He's our co-host on Education Exchange. We're lucky to have him. Last year, we have been on the air for about 27 years, doing education service in this community. And thanks to Public Access TV to host us all this time. They provide us with the studio facilities, with the directors, with the people that you see behind the glass door there, control room, floor directors, camera people. So we were really lucky to have Public Access TV here and this service. And we wanted to extend our service beyond the education, as our director, Dr. Geraldo Sandoval just said. Beyond the education into the worldwide. Mm-hmm. And so every one of our 5 episodes will be dealing with a different kind of activity in our community.
Well, thank you, Dr. G,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Hani, and Dr. Thacker for having me. I'm very happy to be here. And any questions that you would like to ask, I'll be very happy to answer.
We've sort of decided to call this first episode Himalayan Echoes from America.
Oh,
And that, I think, is significant because we have someone here who's an American, originally from Nepal. Now, for our larger audience, to let them know where Nepal exactly is, there's a lot of history behind Nepal. Nepal is a small little country sandwiched between India to the south, China to the north, and that's Tibet to one side, with the mighty Himalayas. And what's not commonly known is that Nepal is not part of India. Nepal is one of the only independent countries in all of Asia that wasn't colonized by the British. In fact, fought them back twice.
It was called the buffer state.
And the kings of Nepal, the ruling prime ministers, made an arrangement where very wisely they kept the British at bay in exchange for cooler climes and also their brave soldiers known as the Gurkhas. The history of Nepal goes back to close to 5,000 years and probably more famously known for Mount Everest. Also a melting point of 2 major world religions. You have Hinduism and Buddhism. And there was a lot of trade that happened through Nepal, the old Silk Route, which went all the way through Nepal to the Middle East on one side and probably as far as Japan to the other side. The other thing about Nepal people don't know is that it is the country where the pagoda-style architecture was actually discovered. It's not Japan, it's not China, it was Nepal. And that was sent as a dowry to a Chinese prince when there was a intercultural marriage between 2 provinces in Nepal and one in China. So anyway, on that history, the last thing to point out is the unique one-of-a-kind flag. That is the flag of Nepal, triangular. Those represent the mountains. You have the sun and the moon. The red goes for blood, and the blue is a sort of a royal mark.
Peace.
Yeah. So on that note, I will hand it over to my hosts to begin the interviewing of author Pramila Dougal.
thank you.
What inspired you to write this book?
Well, what inspired me to write this book was living in the American society. I felt that there were a lot of young people going astray.
Mm-hmm.
And families were having problems. And it was more with the children that came from well-to-do families. And as adults, when they grew up, they, having had it all made for them, became narcissistic in character. So their wealth was their shield. And that trait they had even as children. And as much as the parents tried to correct it, or some parents did not try to correct it, their ego inflated and their whole personality changed. Whereas you think that people that are rich would be generous, would be compassionate, would think of others, it wasn't so. They had the shield of wealth that protected them throughout, where they could disparage people. They started as bullies in school. They felt gifted, they were privileged, so the rest of them, the rest of the other people just did not count. So I felt, you know what, maybe I should write a book and bring it to light to the parents to see these things happen. Not that it happens with everybody who's rich, but most of the time it's people who are born rich or have inherited money or are even self-made. So that's how I thought I would write the book. And the other thing is, I also wrote the book because I wanted to show human value. Appreciate humanity.
Right.
You know, there are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. And you have to show your integrity. Wherever you come from, be it from a poor family or a rich family, whatever race or creed, you have to have integrity. And this is why I thought I'd write this book. It's really for parents to read.
You know, your experience as a principal.
Yes.
Is that did you experience that? Did you get some of
I
that?
did. I'm very
teaching?
people-oriented
Okay.
because I went to a convent
Mhm.
and it was just girls. So it was people there too. And I started the first kindergarten in Nepal, where I interacted with a lot of children and parents. And when my husband was with the United Nations for the 26 years, I taught in international schools, which means again I interacted with parents and with children. So I did get a picture of everything that was happening. Of course, there was a big variety, but there were several that showed their traits right from the beginning, from childhood.
Interesting, that expression that money is evil.
Money is the root of all evil. There's a
Yeah.
song too that says
And
that.
it's evil, but it's also how
How you use it.
and behavior, and you know that it's intriguing how that creates character.
Yes,
And,
because you see, a character begins as a family in the home, and your home is your first school, and your parents are your first teacher. So most parents, of course, want to do it right. They want to raise their children the proper way, whether they're poor, whether they're rich, it doesn't matter. But there's some inborn traits that you see as children, and it's very difficult to correct that. And there are parents who give up. So this person is so sheltered, when I get into trouble, my father will save me, we have the money, and this goes on, and that's how narcissism develops.
One of your reading, of course, your very rich background and CV was so impressive, and because Viraj and I work in the education area in our TV activity, we are interested in teachers, and you began your career as an elementary school teacher?
I went to a British school. I was barely 5.
Yeah.
And I was there for 12 years, which meant 10 months at the school and 2 months in Nepal with my parents. The 12th year is senior Cambridge, which is equivalent to first year of college. Very serious work. Papers come from Cambridge, and our question papers go to Cambridge. So it's just a name. They don't know you. They either pass you or fail you. But after that, I opened my own school. It was the first kindergarten that I opened. And after 3 years, it became an elementary school. I have very capable sisters that took it over once I left to join my husband in the United Nations. They kept it for 35 years. So it's all of the education that we got at the convent that it wasn't education only in the academic sense, it was education for life. Life's education
More
that we got.
practical.
Yes, we were taught right from wrong, show compassion, be generous. That was the upbringing that we had. So when I write this book, I have that in the background. And I'm looking at all these kids that I say, my book is very relevant to the society that we live in right now. Things are happening that way.
But you taught in Vienna
I taught in
and
Vienna.
in China, and what else? I mean,
The first post
Austria.
yeah, the
Yeah.
first post that my husband had was in Vienna, Austria. I taught there at the International American School.
Okay.
Then our second posting was in New York, 17 years in New York. I taught for 6 years at the UN school. Then I moved to a very exclusive school in Tarrytown, Westchester, where the Rockefellers went. It was called Hackley. And I taught there for 5 years. And then again, we were moved to China. I taught at the international school in China. Then we were brought back again to New York. I went back to Hackley. So when my husband retired, California, life's a beach. You retire. But
That,
you know, what I knew best was teaching, and I'm a very hyper person. I have to have a project. Something has to go on for me. So I became a principal of a private school in Long Beach, Oakwood Academy, for 9 years.
you have a history of education. Right.
I'm going on, Dr. G's and your point on, and also when you mentioned about kids in America and how money changes them, right? Coming from a social science point of view, it takes me on to the idea of feudalisms and democracy. So, in the older feudalisms, there was responsibility that came with money. We see some of that in settings like Nepal too. When that evolved into what we call democracy, it becomes economic democracy, where certain loyalties are lost. That means you're not obliged to look after, your lesser fellow, maybe whether it's your serf, whether it's your assistant, whether it's, so how do you translate some of that older thinking to, let's say, the new world and your experiences in your varied teaching?
So when you talk about the feudalistic system like what we had in Nepal, certain people were privileged and the rest were ignored. But when you talk about a democratic society, it's free for all because it's democracy, and therefore everybody is entitled to an education. In Nepal, to this day, education is non-mandatory. It's still a luxury. So when I went to school, there were just a few families that could afford or even thought of educating girls, because girls were not educated. They were married off early. So I was privileged, and at that time you had the king's daughters. They went to school too. So we were the few that were privileged. And having had that education, and as I said, it wasn't just the convent education, Shakespeare and Byron and everything else. Yes, we've got all of that, but we got education for life. So when I come to a society that is very democratic, it's good, it's free for all, but then you pick and choose, and there's some that have no direction, and therefore you have so many problems. And that's why I say my book is very relevant to the society we live in.
Sure.
It makes me think about we've got departments of education
Mm-hmm.
that dictate what the curriculum for education looks like. That's very different than understanding how to live life, like you say.
Right.
The education of life.
Right.
There it's democratic, it's free,
Yeah.
but it's very structured and very limited
Absolutely.
to that curriculum in itself. And so, and in your book, you're expressing that there is much more than that curriculum. There's life too.
And what I am trying to say is family has to get involved, because the family nucleus is so important. Your character begins there. Your parents teach you, and what children perceive is very different to what's really happening. So if the parents do not assist in helping the child cannot make it. And what happens then? You get into bad company. You go into drugs, you go into killing, all of this happens. So what I'm trying to say here is, I won't give it all out, but this is a family that was doing right. Very wealthy family, doing it all right, but they had a bad seed. And they couldn't correct the bad seed, no matter how much they tried. And what happened with the bad seed? Caused them so much of misery. With everything that they had, they didn't have their peace of mind. And they were doing it right. But that also happens.
Before we go further in the question, it just jumped into my mind the role of Ramesh Dugal in your as a motivation to write the book. He was behind that, right?
Oh yes, I had support from
Your
my
husband?
Ramesh
Yeah.
Dugal, and my two sons. Both my sons are eye doctors.
And what did he say?
He said, oh no, he said, go do it, because it wasn't something new.
Yeah.
I have been writing from 3rd grade. My dream, my passion was to be, more than be an author. I just, as a child, maybe just, in 3rd grade, I didn't think that far. I wanted a book with my name. That's all I wanted, a book with my name. So I would write stories, I would staple pieces of paper together, and on I would say, written by, and I could see my name. And with that, I was delighted. I kept writing throughout school, went to college, my writing time diminished, but I made notes. And then got married, of course not, absolutely no time. Everything was at the back burner. Then I started using my head, because as I said, I'm very I'm very people oriented. What did that person say? What was the experience he was talking about? What incident occurred? And I have a very good memory. So it was all in my head, a jumble, and I said, okay, when I start, and I always knew I wanted to write fiction. So when I get my turn, this is what I'm going to say, this is what I've heard. I had it all in my head. So when I said I'm going to write, my husband gave me all the support possible. My children said, oh Mama, go ahead and do it. And that's how I got it. And look how long it took me to get a book. Look at my white hair.
Right.
Sure. I had the opportunity to read your book and also did a short review on your book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to thank Dr. Hani for bringing that out in the Press Citizen this Saturday, and hopefully it's gotten out there to people, and they're going to attend your reading that follows our show at Prairie Lights. And the question I'd like to ask is how and why you chose the setting you did for the book.
You mean just for the Shadows of Wealth?
Yeah, for Shadows of Wealth.
Well, as I said, the setting was done because I based it on people that I had met, stories that they had told me. When I taught children, my interaction with children and with their parents, I put all of this together, and I could definitely see some traits in some of these children and where they were going. And by the same token, when I spoke to some parents, I felt, well, they were really not with giving children lessons for life, but giving them gifts, material gifts, all these technological things. You have an iPhone, you have a car, you have this, you have all of this. So the real things, the real elements that one needs to prosper in life was missing. So these children were either not given or had wrong direction, or even with the direction or even given, they chose to do it differently.
Yeah, tell us, why do you think that this book will appeal to readers?
The book will appeal to readers because, as I said, it's very relevant to our society. And then it's an eye-opener too to parents, because they think, have we done it right? They question that too. Okay, if you have adult children, they're gone. But then when you have an adult son and you're having problems with the son or the daughter, this book says, did I see anything in them? Should I have corrected it? Should I have spent some more time with my children? Because parents have very little time. When I was teaching at the private school, I know several parents that would walk in and say, I don't have time, I'm a working mother, my husband is working, I don't have time to do homework with my children, I have absolutely no time. Any problem that came about was kept for Saturday and Sunday to deal with. And you cannot wait for problems.
So it's not just for parents then, the book?
It's for everybody.
Yeah.
It's for everybody. Would-be parents. You could read that book and you might think, you know what? This reminds me of Uncle Bob. He came very close to this character. Or I once had a cousin. Boy, that cousin is very much like this person in the book, because there's a lot in that book. I'm only saying they're traits of narcissism. But when you read the book, you see it in reality, because it's applied to the life of a family. And as I said, they had everything, but what happened with the bad seed? And it comes to a beautiful end. You will never guess the end.
I'm not gonna guess it.
Don't guess it, don't
Okay.
even try.
We discussed the influence of your educational career on your composition as a writer, as a thinker, as a novelist. Your travels around the world is another source
Yes.
that made your rich writing
Mhm.
show here.
Mhm.
So, can you tell me exactly how, was it your education experience more, or your travels, or both of them, your relationship, your family, your history in Nepal, your history in Europe and in America? How all of those factors converge together to make the writer in you, the
Well,
author?
partly it was my education, and as I've already explained, and it also was family, because we were brought up very differently. When I was sent to school, I was barely 5, and it was made very clear to me, we're sending you to a good school because we want you to have a better future. We're investing in you. I remember my parents would say, instead of putting the money in the bank, we're putting it on you. Now, that was a big order, right? But I kept that in mind. And travel. When you travel, you really educate yourself, because one thing, you have respect for all kinds of cultures, all kinds of religion. But it's an eye-opener. But then when you close yourself in one society and say, you know what, I'm happy to be here, I don't have to know anything else, then you've closed your mind. And you really don't enjoy the world the way it is given to you. It's a beautiful world, and we're imperfect people. But by the same token, you know, we can pick up all the beauties of the world and make it positive. And so my book, it's not only that, I have my other 2 books. I have Family Secrets, and I have 2 in 1. Now, Family Secrets has 3 different stories. They're short stories. That's my first book, 2010. The first story is Sins of the Parents. The second one is Sisters in Crime. And the third one is Runaway Husband. Now, you can ask me, how did you get all of this? How did you put all of this together? The first story is Sisters in Crime. When I went to school, I had a lot of Asian girls from Bhutan. The Dalai Lama's 2 sisters were in my school. The Queen Mother of Bhutan, years before me at my school. The Princess of Sikkim were in my school, of course, much ahead of me. But we had a group that were called Anglo-Indians, and they were offsprings of these young British planters that were sent to Darjeeling to take care of the tea plantations, and they were keeping the Lepche women as their mistresses. And Lepche is a mixture of Tibetan and Nepali. So these girls that were in our school, they were called Anglo-Indians because one of the parents was British. And when they went home, they came with stories that were unbelievable. So, you know, girls like to gossip. We'd run to them and hear, you know, what happened. I didn't follow anybody, but I took it from them, my first story. The second story, we had 2 girls, 2 sisters. The only thing they had in common was their name. Absolutely nothing in common. They came from a very good family, and where their life took them, but then they were bonded by blood, and they came together for what? To commit a crime. Sisters in crime. And the third one is a common subject, you know, in any society, any culture, wives run away, husbands run away, so. But that has a timeline. That was during the time of Indira Gandhi, when she was murdered.
Right.
So I based it on that.
Coming back to Shadows of Wealth,
Mm-hmm.
is there a particular passage from your book you'd like to sort of
Read first.
so
There
that
is.
we can comprehend the,
Yeah.
the narcissism of
Mama J.
For people who are not going to have the privilege of seeing you reading live at Prairie Lights in a few hours,
yeah.
at least you will have
Some-
a sample
yeah.
of your
Okay.
writing.
Absolutely.
I don't want to give out everything
Just a
because then you
small-
won't read my book.
Yeah.
So, you know, I can't be saying all of that's in my book, but there's one passage. Mamaji, the verdict on me is one of deserving punishment, overbearing, presumptuous, and haughty, My incendiary character is eclipsed with shame. I stand disgracefully before you, defeated and guilty, continued her son.
Perfect.
That's-
It looks to me, from what you just, from the phrase that you use really very selective words, that each word, like, for example, it has more than one dimension. So, as a fellow writer, I am not a fiction writer, but I write essays, I write non-fiction, I write poetry.
Mm-hmm.
This is very much poetic.
Well, that I don't know, but I like to write because writing really is a play of words. You choose the words to make it just the way you want it, but you have an option of other words too that can distract you. So you have to be sure to pick the right word so that when you read just that one sentence, the reader catches on. And I don't write it with the big words where you have to take out a dictionary and refer to it. And my sentences are rather short because in school we were always taught to write 2 long sentences and a short sentence. That's the British style. But when I had my first book, Family Secrets, I gave one story. I was afraid to give the whole book to an editor. I just wanted to get an opinion. I gave my one story to this guy to look through. And after a week he called me and he said, I have your story ready. So I said, what did you think? He said, there wasn't a spelling error. There wasn't a punctuation error. But there's something that you have to correct if this is for the American group. In England we were told, I remember at our school we were told, let's go to the park, said Mary. But here you got to say, Mary said, let's go to the park. The subject has always to come first.
Right.
So he made me change it.
Right. Well, there are a few differences between.
There is, yes. Yes.
English.
But when you write fiction, it's very tempting. It's a clean slate. There's nothing there. You create, you write, you build your characters, you have your plot. So keep moving. There's nobody to block you.
The parts that I read in your book still gives me the feeling that there is a poetic kind of epical tendency in your choices, and that's why I wonder if you write poetry.
I write poetry.
Okay.
I do. He'll give you one that I wrote on my sister. I write poems. I write poems, and that was one thing that I did because when I was in school, I first got into writing, and then there came a time when, when you get into trouble and you're yelled at and, you're told you're naughty or this and that, the other, because poem is really all emotions. It's not right that you can't continue tomorrow, you got to do it today.
True.
So you write poems out of your emotions.
But you remind me of, or you were saying about the simplicity in your expressions in your writing. 2 long sentences, 1 short sentence, but the meaning or in your decision to choose certain words. I'm not sure if it was Thoreau, but he had an expression where it says, simple words make hard reading. Very much like your title.
Yes.
Yes. Shadows of Wealth.
Because when you have a book that's written very in simple words, you say, oh my goodness, there's nothing exciting. But if you're a true reader, there's a lot of depth in simple words. You don't need fascinating words, big words. You don't need that at all because it's fiction. But I want people reading my book to believe that it is real and keep their interest there. Whereas if you use big words and you start beating around the bush, make it long and lengthy, you lose the interest. And when the book is finished, I want them to say, boy, it was fiction, but it could be real. And I can tell you a story because I had that experience. When my book came out, 2-in-1, it's transgender. It's a very, very important book. And I think it's important because, again, it's very current to what is happening. My book came out and the LA Times, Sunday LA Times, there was a whole page and the title said, My Daughter, My Son. And I'm reading, and I'm thinking, gosh, this woman plagiarized. She's taken my story. That's my book. But how could it happen so fast? Because my book was only out a week ago. But she was an author, and she had given a name, and her email address was also there. So I said, I think I'm going to send her an email. I did send her an email, and I said, buy my book, read it, and tell me what you think. Please get back to me. She called me on the phone, not even with an email. She called me on the phone, and she said, look, I want to tell you, I read your book, how close we came. But there's a big difference. Yours is fiction, mine is fact.
Wow.
Wow, isn't that stunning?
Yes.
And when I was doing that book, and I talked to my son, and my sons, they being doctors, they said, Mom, you don't know anything about medicine and all of this business. So I said, you know what, I'm going to educate myself, because I do believe in it. I do believe, I have my reasons to believe in all of this. And I'm going to put myself in this 13-year-old shoe, and let's see how it goes. And that's how the book came out.
Well, again, I just happen to know closely one of the Nobel Prize winners in literature, and that was Egyptian legendary Naguib Mahfouz. And Naguib was a good friend of mine. We used to have, I would not say he was my mentor in writing, because he was a novelist, I was a poet. But he did influence me a lot with his character, with his choices. And one time he told me, and that's just to support your idea about simplicity, and making it straightforward. He said, I always think if you have good idea, you don't need a lot of decorations.
No, you don't.
Because the content will supersede any additions that you may add. When you don't have rich content, you can decorate as you want. You can put a lot of beads and jewelry and twinkling something. And he was right about that, I think. And that's, I feel, you do the same.
Yeah, when you write, you don't have to use these big words and try to, because by the time you finish using these big words, you yourself get lost. It's the theme that's in your mind, the focus. You have that, where are you going? How do you get there? And there's so many interferences in between. You can make it long, you can make it short, you can say it this way, that way, but you want to be honest to yourself, and you want to write what comes first to your mind. And that's how people pick a bad book. There's no such thing as a bad book. Everybody thinks differently. A good book, okay, a good book might be good for me, but might not be good for you. It depends on what you're looking for.
Because I'm not a novelist, I still want to ask you another thing that Naguib told me. He said that when I put down the characters and I start to draw the characters, there is a time during the writing where I don't control what they do.
Yes.
Is that true?
Oh yes, they take you over right away.
Oh,
No,
tell me
right
about
away.
this.
I've written 3 books sitting at my dining table. And I tell you, those characters, they bully you.
Really?
They do.
So
And it's your own creation.
you create a monster.
Yes, you've got to read my first book, Family Secrets. You'll see it right there. My first book is, the first story is, how am I forgetting, Biraj? Okay, they bully you, and they literally put words into your mouth, and you say, no, I don't want to do it this way. But if you don't do it that way, you're stuck.
So there is a conversation between you and the character.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
And sometimes the character says, leave me alone.
Oh.
And you want to pull this character up, but the character refuses to move. Then what do? You get stuck. You have to read my first book, Family Secrets. You see it all in there. It's very, very vivid. They don't let you alone. And sometimes you get to that point when you say, gosh, I've had it, I'm not going to do anything. You put your book down and you leave.
Yeah, when he told me this, you know, I said, well, maybe he drank a little bit
No, no,
more than he should. How can the character that you created?
Oh yes, oh yes. They
he
are
said
alive.
just the same.